And apparently I don't have it properly set up. Of course not. In the future I'll be running a short sort of train arrival sound to let people know that it started. So if people are away getting stuff to drink or eat or whatever, they'll have the audio cue if they turn up their speakers. And now it plays. So, how's it going, guys? Not bad. Not bad. My holidays were effervescent as ever. That's nothing new, but hopefully you guys had some relaxing time off. Feel free to turn your webcams on inside of Discord. Again, I'm not going to require it for you guys, although later on, just as a heads up, I know some instructors do. Hey. Alright, so just a quick little bit of business first. Do you guys have a class immediately before this, running from noon till 3? Yeah. And which class is it? Because I don't have access to your full schedule, I only have access to what I teach you. Text her day. I'll see if I can spell it loosely, right? Pretty sure that's still not right. But the tapping of the keyboard, that was definitely me. 1 second, I'll boost my mic. Here, I'll just move my mic away from my mountain of monster games. Like I said, I've never used Discord for this before. Oh, we should be good then. Okay, yeah, Thea just said, and my apologies in advance when I mispronounce her name. It's not a question of if, it's probably most likely when. Thea said 25 plus will turn off webcams. Alright. Yeah, no worries. It's nice for me to have some idea of the name behind, or sorry, the face behind the name rather, because I am absolutely horrendous with names, but I'll remember someone's face. So anyway, first little bit is a little bit of a preamble, basically what I said in the introduction. Oh, so I feel the struggle for having cats around. Mine, thankfully, is currently sleeping behind me, but if you watch that intro video, you've heard her. Yes. As far as the actual enrollment number, if I check real quick. Bizarre. Okay. That works for me. Again, it was just a little bit of an extra. Couple different reasons. One is I'm more familiar with running the Twitch platform, and it's a little bit more stable as far as resolution of my screen, which is what you guys are going to be using to base your work off of. I just boosted my mic. Sweet. How about now? There. I just put on a 7.5 decibel increase. That's right. Like I said, it was just an experiment. Is it okay if I go even higher? Okay. I'm going to boost it just a little more so that if you guys end up having to turn your volumes up or down, it has to go up as opposed to down. Sorry, down as opposed to up. So one more boost. Filters. Yeah, directions. It's effective Monday. Yeah, it's a person-to-person thing. But again, I'd much rather have people having to turn down the stream volume as opposed to straining to hear at max out. So I'm going to stop messing with things. My actual mic in is still in the acceptable range, so... Oh, I'm watching myself here and I'm a little weirded out. double check in the top on the double check the actual tab itself and try right clicking on it, muting site, and then right click unmute site. That may be it. And if not, you can go down to your volume mixer. So right clicking on the speakers icon or whatever happens to be in the bottom right. Oh, you're in the app. Try rerouting to CNPD address into a browser, or sorry, into a Chrome tab. Give me 1 second, I'll copy and paste the channel link into this Discord. Sorry, not Discord. I can do it in Discord too. Too many channels. So many channels. Yep. No, it's a reef aquarium. I wish it was a terrarium. I'd like to have a terrarium at some point. The little cog icon in the bottom right of the Twitch window, if you click it and then go up to quality, yep. And different people's internet connections will probably handle it differently, which is the other reason for using Twitch. So even if your internet connection, if you're running in a rural area, that way you can at least either have a somewhat more stable stream rather than Zoom, or at the very worst, pay more attention to the audio and the general positioning for the 3D, and then watch it back once it gets logged. Exactly. That's me. Until the last 3 weeks of modeling, mouse and keyboard, pretty much from day 1 for texturing, you will need pen input. And for those last 3 weeks in modeling, it's going to be ZBrush. So I would highly recommend against mouse and keyboard for that. But I'll give you guys plenty of heads up. Okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure who is who and where. Alright. So, like I was saying before, don't need one. Not required, but it's always nice to have. I think they're saying that you need one. So just to give you an idea, right now I'm running 2 monitors. And already my desktop looks like this. So yeah, 2 monitors does help. Anyway, so yeah. Alright, I'm going to get to the meat of the lesson now. So, continuing onwards and upwards. So, first time you open 3ds Max, and for the first week and a bit, I'm going to make, I know it's not a true assumption, but I'm going to treat it with the assumption that you guys are still fairly new to navigating inside of 3ds Max. You do have intro to 3D, you do have animation where you're, moving things around, pivot points, hotkeys, all that fun stuff. But I'm going to introduce all the primary concepts as if you're brand new, and then we'll just pick up speed as the course goes. That being said, one of the key complaints, it's a complaint, but it's something that they just wish wasn't the case, that I have with students is that I typically go quite fast. Part of that's because, number one, this is my 6th year doing this, so I've pretty much got a good rhythm going at this point, and it's kind of hard for me to slow it down. And a lot of this stuff has been drilled into me so often that it's basically second nature. So that being said, either in the Discord or in the Twitch chat, if I'm starting to pick up speed and I lose you at some point, much like what I said in that introduction video, don't feel afraid or don't hesitate to say, can you slow down a bit? Especially, a couple of these in, I'm going to be picking up speed and I will not notice it. So, do yourself and at least 2 of your classmates a favor and just ask me to slow down or repeat something if I blaze through it quickly. So, someone actually mentioned as much in, I forget which channel it was, but on the Discord main channels for the course, don't be afraid to ask questions. And that's very true. That's why I upvoted it. So, I assume you guys have 3ds Max open as per the intro splash screen. My apologies in advance because of the mic gain. My keyboard is right underneath my mic, and it's not a actual mechanical keyboard, but it definitely sounds like one, so it's probably gonna get a little loud once I start naming stuff. Once you're inside of Max, usually I immediately go into the perspective view and maximize it with Alt and W rather. And there's a couple things that I'd recommend that you guys set up each time you start 3DStudio Max on a new workstation. Now, obviously that's not a huge problem right now because right now we're all working from home. But in a job atmosphere, if you're working in studio, again, typically you have your own station, but if it's revolving staff or if it's shifts, like someone comes in from 9 to 5:30, someone else comes in from 6 to whenever, so the midnight shift or the night shift, which I've done on a number of occasions. Not fun, but sooner or later certain things are going to be turned off on your station, or there are certain things that you're going to want to turn on at your station, and I'm going to go over some of those things with you guys right now. So we're inside of 3DStudio Max, and when we go over to the Creation tab, and I've got pings set for my cursor, so whenever I go to click on something, you'll see a little circle over it. I'm going to go to any primitive, draw it in. So just click in dragging. And right now I didn't reset my UI before starting this, so all of this stuff is still in what I usually work with. But by default, inside of 3ds Max, as soon as you create something, or by default when Max is handling a file, specifically a 3DCO Max file, it defaults rather to something called generic units. So if I pick a box, sphere, cylinder, it's giving or recording radius and height values on the cylinder, height, length, width on the cube, radius on the sphere, but all of these are set to generic units, which don't have a good translation between programs or between utilities. Oh, pause for a question. Yeah. It's your login with, it's your FOL login at fanshaweonline.ca. So I'll just slow down a bit so that actually, while I have this stuff up and while I wait for the login issues to clear, you'll notice that right now we're seeing the wireframe on top of everything. And that's just toggled on and off with F4. So that's going to toggle you between edge face mode. So wireframe persistently shown. F3 goes to true wireframe mode, or just see things through, or see all the way through things. So again, probably something you guys have seen in Intro to 3D, and I'm not going to make the assumption that you have, but it's a nice way of figuring out where vertices are aligned to one another, or where they are in relation to one another on separate sides of an object. So first things first, just so that we have a better understanding of exactly how big this cube is, because 90 doesn't really mean anything aside from inside a generic scene 3ds Max scene. We're going to go up to the top, and I will point out that currently I'm using 3ds Max 2021.3, I think, is the latest iteration. I'm going to be using it. I'm not saying that you guys have to upgrade to it, although most likely when you signed up for the program, you got the latest version of Max, which I believe at the time was 2021. That being said, as personal opinion, I'm not super pleased with the amount of optimization 2020. That is weird. Yeah. Whichever email you registered at Autodesk with, if it was your personal or your school account, that's the one that it's asking for. Clap. Oh, believe me, that is not the worst of your problems with Autodesk. Yes. I stay in Ortho as much as possible, and there are people who fight me on this. What? Fighting with Autodesk and Max? I'll have a walk through for you guys step by step, do exactly this, and this when I have you guys going to ZBrush, so don't worry about it. Worst comes to worst, what I'll have you guys do is download the ZBrush 30-day trial, because it does come at the end of the term and it's only 21 days, so we'll just throw all the rigmarole of having to deal with the licensing servers out. This is also going to be, if I'm not mistaken, the first time that multiple classes are going to be needing ZBrush licenses at the same time, and I don't know how the virtual license server will hold up to that. So don't worry, there are contingency plans. So I'm going to do them right now. Yeah. So going up to Customize, Unit Setup, and immediately go up to the top for Display Unit Scale and switch it over to Metric. So this is going to measure everything that you create in Scene, in this case in the metric system of, metric units of measurement. And I usually default this to meters. Go one step further to System Unit Setup. And where it says System Unit Scale, I usually switch this over to centimeters. I'm not typically building out large scenes inside of Max. I'm working on whatever will go into that scene. So, for example, right now I'm working on an interior for a garage. All my stuff was modeled standing alone, so not actually populated or placed in the scene, and this is the easiest scale I found to work with. So Customize, Unit Setup, Display Unit Scale, set over to Metric and Meters, and then under System Unit Setup, Centimeters. So that now when you start drawing out geometry, it actually has a metric unit of measurement. The other nice thing about this is that since you guys will be exporting into Unity as the sort of de facto game engine for the first year and a half, I believe, and then you guys have the option of switching between Unity and Unreal Engine, a 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter cube inside of Max will translate to a 1 by 1 by 1 cube inside of Unity. So some of your character controllers, some of your effects take into account Unity's distance measurements. Those are all being done with the equivalency of meters inside of Max. So it helps with scale translations between the two programs. After you've set up your units, go Customize and Preferences. So downloading Unity, I don't believe you guys have an actual Unity class until first term of second year. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me. I've never taught it. So the next thing I want you guys to do is go up to Customize, Preferences, And the first tab that it brings you to is Preference Settings and the General tab. Right there it says in the upper left, Scene Undo. And again, this is all set to my base, but by default it will be levels 20. This is literally just the number of steps that Max will record for you in order to be hitting back with Control Z. So I usually have it at 120, 140. I don't think I've ever hit that before, but if you want to drive it even higher, you can. More importantly, if you switch over to the File Handling tab, so immediately to the right of, did you? 500 undos. It works. So just next to the General tab under Files, or for the Files tab rather. I'm not going to require you guys to do this. If you don't, however, I can almost guarantee what I'm about to do or what I'm about to show you will save you tearing your hair out at some point. There's not a lot of stuff that I'd say is that I would absolutely swear by, but this is one of them. Inside the Files and File Handling, turn on Increment on Save. It's the fourth option from the top here. And I usually turn off my auto backup. You guys can leave that on. We won't have to worry about that until modeling 2. So I'm just going to hit OK for the time being. And I've currently got a week 1 folder started. So I'm just going to go File, Save As. You guys don't have to do this. So when I go to save it, it's modeling week 1, session 1. So in the upper left, it saves it as whatever you typed in. Once you have Increment on Save turned on, every time you subsequently hit Control S, so I just hit it once, twice, 3 times. As you hit Control S, it's going to not overwrite what you were previously working on or the previous version of the file. It's going to save a new iteration or a new version of the file at its current state. So unfortunately, I saved it as section 1, so it automatically detected the 1 on there. If I go Save As again, call this something more like Modeling Intro. And now I hit Control S. It's going to append a 0, 1 to the file name. And now each time I hit Control S, if I go into that week 1 folder, it's saving out multiple versions of the file as you work on it. So what I want you guys to set as one of your personal goals while working inside of 3Studio Max is every, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes, hit Control S with Increment on Save turned on. If you can get into the habit of hitting Control S every 5-10 minutes, eventually it'll become subconscious and you'll just be hitting it without actually realizing it. That way, when Max crashes, notice I didn't say if, when Max crashes, the most work that you're going to be losing at any given time is between 5 and 10 minutes. So however long it takes you to Control S to save. Now, some people say, oh, but there's auto backup. It'll save out an iteration every 5 minutes. Yeah, that's true. But I've found, in my personal experience, when I've been working with auto backup turned on, those files are just as susceptible to corruption as your regularly saved scene files. So I've come to not rely on them for that reason. And then later on, once you guys start working with high poly stuff, so right now our models are going to be in the range of 3,000, 5,000 tries. Later on, when you're working on stuff like character retopology, and you have one single piece of your model that's coming in at about 250,000 tries, and an overall scene counted in the millions, kind of sucks to have auto backup lock up your system while it tries to save every 5 minutes. So I just turn it off. You guys are free to keep it saved or keep it turned on rather, because at this point, again, we're not going to be taxing our systems that much. But at the very least, turn on increment on save. I'm sure, or I assume Rob's already shown you guys, but I personally hate those selection preview highlights. So I kept it back to basic. You mouse over something, highlight, or it trims in yellow. You click on something, it highlights light blue. I find that distracting, so I usually turn that off immediately. So selection and preview highlights inside of viewports, toggle that off. And then inside of gamma and LUT, not a big deal for modeling, more so a concern for texturing. So this creates a gamma offset, or an effectively, not literally, but effectively an exposure offset for your viewport. I turned that off as well. So just create a cube. And there are a couple interesting features that were added into 3 Studio Max 2021.3 or update 3 that I'm actually still getting used to, because they actually changed some things I use quite a bit, or use past tense quite a bit. But there are certain things that have still stayed the same. So after you've created the box, right click, convert to editable poly, or you can right click inside the modifier stack, which is currently set to just box. One thing that you guys should always do as soon as you convert something to an editable poly is go up into the name field. So modifier stack, modifier list, obviously. Right here is the object's name. Always rename your stuff. It doesn't matter if it's a descriptive name. It could just be, I would suggest it not be this, but it could just be round thing 1, round thing 2. What you don't want is to have a scene that's populated with, come here, with, 15, 20, 100 objects, and all of them are named some variation of box or cylinder followed by a number. Obviously it's not very descriptive, and then when you guys are trying to find a specific component to your scene or a specific component to your model, or this even goes into Unity and texturing, basically name your stuff. It saves you so much trouble in the end. Also with the UI open, or the modifier tab open, so I just converted it. If you guys haven't already, by default the ribbon will come in with just a single strip or a single ribbon down the side. If you mouse over the very far right edge of the viewport, it'll switch over to the icon that you're seeing right now, arrows pointing in either direction, or both directions rather. Just click and drag on that until it pops into 2 lists or 2 ribbons. That'll save you time scrolling between different functions inside of an editable mesh without eating too much of your viewport. On the topic of the viewport, you'll notice that I by default have question. Go ahead. Convert over to an editable poly. You got it. So the reason why I don't have Scene Explorer or Layer Explorer open at any given time is, number one, I like having as much viewport space as I can. It's also the reason why I don't typically have my camera on or camera embedded into the Twitch stream. I figured first class, you may as well, see who's teaching you. If you really need it open, again, going back to what someone asked previously as to whether or not you need a second monitor, you don't actually literally need it. Like, you won't be unable to do anything by not having a second monitor, but having that second monitor is going to be handy when, if you do work in a large scene, you can actually throw the Scene Explorer over onto your second monitor and use it to navigate. Again, we're not going to be getting into anything that complex just yet. So once inside of an editable poly, if you guys weren't aware of already, the number row at the top of your keyboard, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all correspond to sub-object levels for the mesh. So 1 is vertice, 2 is edge, 3 is border edge, 4 is poly, 5 is element. So vertice is just X, Y, and Z position coordinates in 3D space. Edges are the trajectories that connect the two. Once 3 or more are connected by edges, it becomes a poly, and once multiple polys are sharing edges, they become elements. So if you want to get in and start modifying things quickly, you'll typically not see me come over here to select vertice, poly, edge, poly, whatever. I'll just be hitting 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 on my keyboard. Oh, someone wants a band hammer. Give me a second. So if I want to start, say, modifying this polygon, and this is one of the things that changed in 2021-0.3. Again, I'm not saying that you guys should necessarily upgrade if you're on 2020. I found going from 2019 to 2020 and then 2021, Max has become a little less stable, which is quite a feat. So the main reason I'm in 2021 is so that if any of you guys have opted into 2021, Max has no forward compatibility, unfortunately, for some reason, even though Maya does. So I'm only using 2021 because, again, it keeps me from having to ask you guys to save something as 2020 or as a previous iteration when you might not be working in it. So one of the things that got changed in 2021 was some of the hotkeys, or some of the modifier keys rather, so Shift, Alt, and Control, got bound to commonly used operations inside of Max. So in 2021-3, if you select the face, hold down Shift, and then scale in 2020 and earlier, that would actually cause the face to break off and scale, which again is what I'm used to. But now when you scale something in, it'll actually perform this, an inset operation. So previous to 2021-3, my typical go-to, and I still use it even with all these hotkey changes, is say I was building this up into a parapet or whatever happens to be, and I still do perform this operation, I would go over to extrude. Rather than the extrude command itself, which I find to be a little messy, I'll go over to the extrude settings, so that little sort of window icon to the right of the extrude command. Click it. It's going to bring up the extrude command dialog, so what you're extruding based on and the distance that you're extruding it to, or in this case it refers to it as the height. I would just right click this. So anytime you have a spinner, so those up-down arrows controlling a numerical value, I'm not sure if it's correct to call them spinners anymore, but that's how I refer to them. Anytime you see a spinner, right-clicking it will set its value to its minimum. Yeah, forgot that was on. Actually, I'm just gonna shrink myself. There we go. Now I know how YouTubers feel when they have to shift around their face cams for games. So, sorry, inset command, or sorry, I'm using extrude right now. Extrude settings, brings up the dialog box. Currently it's set to group. I right click the spinner to set it to its minimum value, which is 0. Hit OK. And then I just pull up the polygon as far as I want it to go. If you have a specific value or a specific distance you want it to travel, then yeah. Extrude settings, I want it to go 2 meters up, which again is why we switched it off of generic units. 2 meters, and you know that this is going to be exactly 2 meters. Now, rather than having to go back over to extrude, do that again. You know, now I'm doing it here. It's a lot of mouse traveling. Not that there's anything wrong with it. A lot of the commands can be accessed by right-clicking and going to the quad menu. So this little guy that's popped up here is split into 4 sections indicated by these 4 blue dots, sorry, 4 blue squares rather. So if I go over to extrude settings, hit OK, go back here. When I right click to bring up that menu again, because it's been split into 4, each of these blue boxes aren't just there to indicate that it's the 4 quads. These are also hot buttons to repeat the last command used in each of these menus. So in this case, extrude was the last command I used from the lower left quad, or tool set 2. If I click that blue box, it's going to repeat the command. So again, saves you some mouse traveling and it increases your speed substantially. I typically take that one step even further, and this is going to be another area where the differences between Max 2020 and 21 come into play. If you go customize, and then up at the top, customize user interface. So if you guys are still on 2020, I'm pretty sure it's still in here. Go customize user interface. Now for 2021 rather, I'll just pop open Max 2020 real quick. I didn't realize that you guys were told specifically to download 2020. So again, 2020 and earlier, it would immediately bring you to the keyboard menu, and I actually still pretty much remember this verbatim, considering how often I've had to do it. It'll have a modifier or command type, menu or group type, and then in the bottom left, now this menu will take a while if you're in 2020 and earlier to populate, because basically what it's done is in this section right here, and I'll show you as soon as 2020 boots, it's going to list every single command that 3DCO Max recognizes. So that's why it takes so long to compile the list. What I want you guys to do, or what I would suggest you guys do, this is definitely optional, I just find it to be incredibly useful for time's sake, is once you have that list of commands, click anywhere in it. Come on, Max, load faster. Click anywhere in it, and then quickly type in REP, Romeo Echo Peter, or Papa rather, Romeo Echo Papa. It'll bring you down to a command that says repeat, and then immediately below that, sorry, repeat last, and then immediately below that it'll say repeat last parentheses poly, and then to the right there's a column, and it'll show a semicolon next to repeat last poly. Now, personally, my hand is always on WASD because Q, W, E, and R are selection, move, rotation, scale. So having to go to the other side of the keyboard doesn't really make sense to me if you're trying to keep your speed up. And here we go. Go faster, Max. So going to the other side of the keyboard doesn't really make sense to me, especially if it's something that you're going to be using often. So by default inside of Max, the spacebar is tied to this icon on your UI. So if you guys haven't used it, it's lock selection. If you have an object or a sub-object selected and you turn on lock selection, Now you cannot select anything else. And this becomes a problem later on inside of UV unwrapping, where this will get toggled on inside the UV editor window, and you will find, oh, I can't select anything else. It's because this thing's on. There we go. So customize user interface, keyboard list, REP, so Romeo Echo Papa. So you click on it, and I'm just going to close it for a second, because again, to me, locking selection, yeah, you're going to use it, but you're going to only be using it so often that traveling down here to turn on the lock isn't such a big ask. It's not really going to be saving any time to have that to a hotkey, especially how rarely you'll be using it compared to what else could be used on spacebar. So instead I go customize UI, click in the list, Romeo Echo Papa, click where it says hotkey, spacebar, it'll say currently assigned to lock selection, hit assign, and now it should say repeat last next to it. If you're in 2021, which obviously I am, they set it to its own menu. It's still the same thing. If I can type correctly. So again, space, assign. So you may be asking, well, there's a repeat last and then there's a repeat last poly. Difference between the two is the repeat last without anything written next to it is a global command. So regardless of what modifier you're in, Max will try and repeat the last command you gave it. Whereas repeat last parentheses poly is, as you would expect, repeating the last polygon command. So now if I start going extrude, and I initially said that I usually set this to 0, move it as far as I want. Now I just hit spacebar, keep going, spacebar, keep going. Etc. So again, I'm not going to be using many hotkeys. In modeling, I'm only going to use that one. Otherwise, I'm going to be showing you the UI component for it. If you want to set up your own custom hotkeys for commands that you find that you use most often, by all means do so. Kind of falls into the entire idea of 15 artists, 15 processes. I guarantee you those 15 artists have 15 different hotkeys or personal hotkey sets. But that's the only one that I'll be using inside of modeling class. Inside of texturing, I'm only going to be using 2. Everything else I'm going to be doing through the UI. Just so you guys know just so that when I do something on screen, you know why it's happening. You don't have to assume that it's a hotkey. I'll actually be showing you. So, on that same note, or going back to what I said previously, vertice to connect 3 or more vertices, you get a polygon. I know that depending on who your instructor was for Intro to 3D, I know Jeff usually puts a bit of heavier emphasis on this than Rob does. Part of that is because a lot of your instructors come from different backgrounds. For example, I myself come from a film and pre-rendered visuals background, so dealing with poly counts, certain aspects of mesh integrity wasn't a problem for me, because as long as the picture looked good, or as long as I hit F9 and what comes up is what the client wanted, that's all I was concerned about. With modeling for games, however, there's a few more considerations that you have to take into account. One of the biggest ones is any face that's defined by more than 4 edges. So here. Or connect. Correct, n-gons. So these guys are 3-sided, 4-sided, 6-sided. So if you guys haven't heard the term or want to have a refresher on it, n-gon means an n-sided polygon. So a n number of sides. In this case, more than 4. So triangles for hard surface stuff, which is all we'll be doing for modeling 1 at least, totally acceptable. They're going to happen no matter what. It's a lot easier to mix your polygons as tris and quads, so 3-sided and 4-sided, than trying to stay quad only. Once you guys get into characters, I will have you or whoever's teaching you will have you working in quad only for certain projects, just to emphasize mesh flow and mesh distribution, mesh integrity. For now, for hard surface, 4-sided and 3-sided both work, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. That being said, anything more than 4 sides, so it doesn't matter if it's 6, 8, or by Max's default, 41 in this case, they're going to cause problems with non-planar issues, which I'll show an example of in a second. Create issues when you start baking or assigning UV coordinates in order to texture. And just in general, for students in particular, I find that having you guys, number 1, looking for these, and number 2, as you look for them, understand how they got created, gives you a better understanding of overall mesh and model theory. So for all of your assignments, anything with more than 4 sides isn't acceptable. Now, for the first, I'm gonna make sure I say this right, for the first 2 assignments, so the assignment that you get next week and the one after, any n-gons you have will be added up, and then based on how many you have, it'll put you into a category for mesh integrity. The more n-gons you have, the fewer marks you have inside that mesh integrity, or for the mesh integrity component of the assignment. So if you have 100 n-gons, your marks can be pretty sad. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to implement this at the midterm. I usually wait to see what the results are on the first 2 assignments, but yes, we're working squares, rectangles, tris and quads. I haven't decided if I'm going to use it for the midterm, but for the assignments that come afterwards, n-gons become a 1-to-1 deduction. So it's not you have a clean mesh, 100%. It's you have 100 n-gons, but you got an 80% on the assignment. 80 minus 100, you got a 0. So I do crack down on it in later assignments substantially. Question? Yep. That's actually what I'm going to show next. So what's actually causing an n-gon? And I'm also going to answer an unasked question. So when we did that right-click menu to convert this to an editable poly, I'm just going to do a copy. When we brought up the right-click menu, you would have seen, or you may have noticed rather, that there are other options to convert this mesh into. Editable mesh, editable patch, editable poly. So we're always going to be in editable poly for modeling. But just to give you guys a little bit of background information, if we switch over to editable mesh, so don't do it, I'm just doing it as a demo. Anytime a 3D program, so a game engine, 3D authoring software, 3D painting software, anytime 3D data is being interpreted, and I could be wrong here, but for the most part, unless you're talking about like cloud and voxel stuff, which is way later on, All those engines and 3DCO Max's viewport, Arnold rendering system, Mental Ray rendering system are all engines. All of them handle triangles, or they're all interpreting your mesh as triangles. So while this may be what we see and what we work with, this is what Max is seeing, or Unity is seeing, or whatever program you're using to render this stuff out. So even though we're seeing four-sided faces or quads, it's breaking each quad into two triangles. So right now with that single that single vertice pulled up, could you model a Moby huge in real life scale? Like the whale, like a giant whale in real life scale, and setting it to like whatever it was, like 1,000 kilometers or something like that. Yeah, probably. At that point, it would probably be easier to just model at a really small scale. Yeah, I was a little confused about that myself, actually. So, going a little off topic, but I do want to address that question. Because it is going to come up later on. Not that specifically, but that idea. Typically in that situation, rather than having your scene scale set to something ginormous, you would actually model it small, get all your details in, do your retopology, do your texture pass, blah, 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 blah. And then before you start rigging it for animation, then you would scale up to true scale and set up your rig and everything. Hold on to that question though, because that's going to come into play with next week's content, if I'm not mistaken. So not only do I have a huge n-gon on the top of this cylinder, you'll also notice that if I go to side view, so if you guys didn't know, you can click on the little view cube, either click and drag or click on a number of its surfaces to go orthographic top, orthographic side, spin, 3Q, whatever. If I go to an orthographic side view of it, that top edge, or what we're seeing rather as a top edge, or breaking its silhouette, you'll notice that it doesn't actually have a white edge on it, while all of these guys do. So this is what's referred to as a non-planar surface. It's essentially what happens when you take a quad or a polygon that has four or more edges to it. Let's see if I can get it right off the bat. Yes. So because Max or any engine is going to be triangulating your mesh or interpreting your mesh as triangles, right now with these two corner vertices raised, Max isn't sure if I want it to look like this or I want it to look like this. It's not sure where the bottom of those two triangles are. So, not a huge issue when you're doing hard surface stuff. I mean, if you look at a sphere, I'll just pop down my resolution a bit. Depending on your angle, when you look at it, you're probably going to see a little bit of non-planar surfaces. Maybe a sphere is a little too basic of an example, but anytime you have a round form, you are going to have the potential for non-planar surfaces. Just realize that that's what's happening, and I'll be showing you guys examples of, or working examples of this as we go, rather. So again, a non-planar surface is just your 3D engine not knowing how it should subdivide a quad into triangles. The easiest way to tell it is running the connect command. So extrude is building polygons out, inset is setting a new polygon on the interior. Come on. Bloop. Still non-planar, of course. And then connect is the easiest way to connect two vertices. So if you guys are being expected to hunt down and eliminate your Engons, what I'm going to do with every single one of your assignments that you hand in to me is, and you guys can try this right now, so grab a cylinder, or if you've been messing around with geometry like I have, as long as you have at least 2 objects. If you only have the one, just hold down shift and pull off on one of the handles. So shift, left mouse button, drag, release, and leave it as a copy. Just have 2 objects in scene. What I'm going to do with every single one of your assignments is I'm going to select all objects in scene, or later on when you guys do asset lists, I'll take the asset list rather than the completed form. Select both objects, hold down shift, click and drag in order to bring up the clone options dialog menu, set it to copy. And then to make things a little easier, especially if you have a whole list of objects that you're trying to check, press Alt then Q, or Alt Quebec. So I misspoke earlier when I said I only use the one hotkey. That would be the other. So now not only do I have copies of both objects, those are the only objects that I can currently see in viewport. So now I can select one of them, doesn't matter which one. Go attach, or if I have multiple objects in scene that I want to check at the same time, I'll go to attach list. So for a lot of commands inside of Max, you have the command itself followed by a modifier. So attach modifier, or attach settings, more accurately said, and it'll give a list of all objects. And my mouse is double clicking again. So if I had, 10 of them, and I wanted to check them all at the same time, assuming these were all different models, I'd go attach list. I'm still in an isolated view, so I still have those 2 originals up here, or in this case my 10 originals. Attach list. Click once inside of the attach list dialog just to make sure that it's active. Control A, select all, so Control Alpha, hit OK. And now you still have your originals up here. So I've just hit Alt Q again, or rather, click on isolation selection to turn it off. And now I can use these guys to test for my mesh integrity while not screwing with these guys at all. So on the one hand, it means that you have to take note of where your Engons are and then go back to the originals and fix them. But on the other side, you can also check multiple objects at the same time. And later on, if you want, you can actually replace pieces, but I won't get into that. So now I've got these guys isolated. I want to check them for their overall integrity. So I'm going to go poly mode, or 4 on the keyboard. Oh, one sec. Shinobu asks, can you do that again? Yep. So if you have multiple objects in scene, and all of them are part of what you're submitting to me as your assignment, select them all, hold down shift and pull off a copy. So shift, left mouse button and drag, make sure it's set to copy. We'll do the other 2 types next week. I then hold Alt and press Q, or Quebec, to use this part of the UI, so isolate selection. So that now I still have my originals up here. I'm not going to accidentally damage them. And then I'm going to select any of them, attach list, click inside the attach list dialog box to make sure that's active, because otherwise if I go attach list and I hit Control A, sometimes it'll just select everything in scene, which is obviously not what you want. Go attach, and now these are both one object. So if I were to bring up my Scene Explorer, can bring it back onto this menu, or screen rather. Now there's just object 0, 2, whereas previously there was 2 of them. Does that have you covered, Shinobu? So now I'm ready to check the actual integrity rather of the objects. So the couple that I'll be looking for are non-planar faces, which again are going to be rare, n-gons, which are going to unfortunately at the start be numerous, and holes. So when I made these guys, or when I was just fiddling around with this, I deleted one of the faces or one of the polygons. My apologies in advance. Because I come from a Maya background, it's hard-coded into me to call polygons faces, just because that's what Maya's interface calls them. So anytime I say select a face, I'm not talking about this face, I'm talking about this face, polygon. So going into polygon mode, going to the selection graphite tab up at the top, so just below your undo, redo, link, all that fun stuff, go over to selection, by numeric. Now I usually have it collapsed because again I'm a big fan of having as much space on screen as possible, but you can unwrap it or unroll the ribbon by this little white white button with a black downward arrow in it. Show full ribbon. Has the same commands, it's just how you click on them is different. Go to the last option where it says by numeric. Make sure that you're in polygon mode for it. Click on greater than, so you want to to be looking at polygons greater than 4 sides, and then click the little selection icon. So any polygon that has more than 4 sides becomes your selection. So right now I can tell it just below the selection modifier, or selection icons rather, that I currently have 4 polygons selected. That means I have 4 n-gons. If this was the second half of the term, that means that once the grade was calculated, I would be losing 4% off the top. So now that I've identified them, what do I do with them? Again, these are copies just so that I can go through and I can test to see how good their mesh integrity is. So I don't want to fix these guys. This is just to identify. I want to go back to my original. It's going to have n-gons in the exact same place. So front and back on both sides, and these guys are still 2 separate objects. Since we're doing hard surface stuff, tris and quads are workable. So right now this is, if you want to see how many sides make up the n-gon, if you select, in this case a polygon, hold down Control, and then click Edge. Holding down Control and clicking another sub-object type. So if I select this edge, hold down Control, click Polygon, it's going to convert your selection over to whatever sub-object shared the sub-object that you had selected. So in other words, if I select this vertice and convert to poly and not double click for some reason, it's going to select all the polygons that share that vertice. If I'm in polygon mode and I go vertice, it's going to select all the vertices that made up that polygon. So 6 vertices, 6 sides, 6-sided n-gon, or hexagon. So since tris and quads are both acceptable, just do some division. I can either split this in half, and now I've got 4 and 4. Or on the other side, I can split across the top. So I'm still using connect. Making sure I've got the right polygon, or sorry, the right vertices selected. And now I've got 3-sided, 3-sided, 4-sided. Both of these are equally equally valid rather. Later on, once we get into mesh flow, mesh distribution, all that fun stuff, which one you choose or which one you use will change based on the situation. For now, both work. So non-planar surfaces, unfortunately, the most reliable way of finding them is just by rotating around. If it's all flat surfaces like this, there won't be any. It's not possible. So non-planars were set. N-gons we just fixed. The last one is holes. So if I switch over to border edge, so any edge that has only one polygon attached to it, that's a border. So there are times when you're going to use border edges or keep holes in as part of your model. So if I had a pop can over here, soup can more like, and that bottom polygon was never going to be seen, like if this is a prop on a desk and the player isn't able to interact with it or whatever, that pop can's never going to move. It doesn't have a physics body on it. That polygon's never going to be seen. It gets deleted. It's still a open edge or border edge, but it doesn't actually affect the integrity of the model as far as its appearance. So it works. As far as more complex n-gons, or n-gons with more than 6 sides, so like right now, and once again I just saw a request in chat after class, can you go over the attached thing again with me? Didn't work exactly the same as yours. Yep, can do, will do. So another way of taking care of the n-gons, now if it's something like this, I would be more, if it was something like this on a model that wasn't a cylinder for Max, I'd be a little more concerned as to how you got to that point rather than how you're going to be dealing with it. But for Max's cylinders, if you go extrude or inset, doing either of them, inset you can go to any value, or if you go extrude and set to 0, and then underneath edit geometry you go over to collapse, solved. You do end up with a whole hell of a lot of tries rather. It's a viable solution. Later on, again, once you guys get into more complex models, there's going to be a difference between doing that and going to vertices and connecting them into, ideally, rectangles. Yep. Actually, I'll just finish this and I'll do it on the other side, the quote-unquote faster way. So later on when we do sub D stuff, that's going to be a time when how you cap or how you correct n-gons is going to have a direct impact on how good the model looks. For right now, I just want to solve it out so that it's not being such a pain in the neck. So this guy's still an n-gon. I'm going to go inset. And again, with inset, it doesn't matter how far it is, even though at this point it's starting to self-intersect. And then collapse. So now it's 3, 3, 3, 3, 3's all the way around. Or extrude settings. Again, right-clicking the spinners will set them to their minimum value. Or if they are capable of going negative, I'll set them to 0. Scale in. Or you don't even have to scale in, but I'm just doing it to show. Collapse. Any distance. It only matters with extrusion, because the difference is that whereas inset is going to try and place a polygon in the middle of what you currently have selected, extrude is actually going to try and move it away. So if I collapse right now, rather than having flat surface, I've now got a pyramid up here. Which again is triangles work too. So as soon as you have it solved into something that's not a multi-sided poly, no worries. So mesh integrity, mesh scale, mesh naming. Let's actually model something. So if you download those files, as I requested it in the intro splash screen, I'm not sure if that's which kundes or which kundesu. I'm seeing it broken into Japanese, so my apologies if that wasn't the intention. Nico. If you go to the little cog icon and switch the quality over to 1080p parentheses source, it was intended to be Japanese. Okay, yeah, that's definitely how I read it. So if you set it over to 1080 source, and here, I'm just going to bring it on. So this is about to get DALL-E again. So settings, quality, 1080p, then settings, advanced, low latency. And I'll take care of some of the offset. Part of it's because I'm running through OBS and it has a little bit of an offset so that, you know, I can bleep myself, or potentially someone could be bleeping me, which I will make every effort to not be an issue. But yeah, that'll decrease your the latency between me running my gums and seeing stuff on screen. So if you guys downloaded those images I requested in the startup splash screen, one of them is a lamp. Again, I'm starting you guys off slow, and then I'm going to pretty quickly ramp things up. So we've got our scene set up with hotkeys, got our scene set up with units, got our scene set up with iterative save, thank God. Now we're going to actually start bringing stuff in. So most of the time, if not hopefully all of the time, you guys are going to be working off of some sort of reference. There's an exercise that's sometimes done in digital drawing where the instructor asks you guys to describe the aspects of a pop bottle. Like, describe what the features are on it, what kind of information is on it. And you guys can kind of think about it yourself right now. And I actually have a water bottle next to me. So people usually say, you know, the cap, you know, the label, the logo, blah, blah, blah. But if you're trying to create something or relate something from your head, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, there are going to be aspects that you miss. So, in the example of the water bottle. So, think about it for a second. What aspects are on a pop or a water bottle? Like, what features need to be added? In this case, let's just talk about the colors and texture. So, think about it for a second. Did you remember the UPC code? Nutritional facts. size of the bottle, recycling. So no matter how familiar you are with a subject, never rely only on your own recollection of it. It's never going to be 100% unless you have an incredibly adept eidetic or photographic memory. It's just not possible. So reference. I'm sure that's not the first time you guys have heard that. So in this case, I'm going to go with the lamp. And what I'm going to do is, now I've just resized Max, and I've brought up the the Explorer window to show the lamp in it. Now I've already set it to 1000, 1000, but later on, you'll see why I'm doing it this way. So I'm going to right click on it, Properties, and I'm going to go over to Details. So if this was a JPEG image that was handed off to me by my concept artist, or another person who's just working on it with me, or working on the project with me, and I want to bring it into Max for a 1-to-1 scale, I'll go over to the dimensions. So right click, Properties, Details, scroll down a little bit, it's right here. I'm going to convert those pixel values over to actual measurements. So I'm going to go to Creation tab, Plane. I'm going to open up where it says Keyboard Entry, and I'm going to enter in values for length and width for the plane. Now, again, I made it easy. It's 1000 by 1000, which makes it square. So realistically, you could use anything here as long as your width is equal to your length. But in this case, let's just play devil's advocate and say we're going to convert it by moving the decimal place over 3 times. Can you repeat that? Yep. So right-clicking on the image or the reference, Properties, going over to Details, and what you're looking for is the dimensions. So width by height pixels. Again, this was set up so that it was 1-to-1, or a ratio of 1-to-1. But I'm going to go into the Creation tab, Basic Geometry, Plane, Unroll Keyboard Entry, and for its length and width, as long as they match, they'll be suitable for this image. But other references that I'm going to give you aren't going to be square. So we're going to move the decimal place over, say 3 times, unless you want to make a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer lamp. It's up to you. You're going to have some display issues at your current scale, but I'm not going to tell you what kind of lamp to make. So in this case, I'm going to move the decimal place over 3 points. So that makes it 1 by 1, 1 meter, 1 meter. Create. You can now cancel out of Properties and drag and drop the lamp onto it. There we go. Now by default, and I'm pretty sure all of you will have this problem. 1 second while I again reset my viewport. This is 1024 by default. Don't worry about this menu. I'm about to 1024, I think. So with default settings, when you bring this in, never a bad idea to compare your in-scene reference to the actual image that you have. So I'm just opening it in Image Viewer inside of Windows. It's actually pretty decent. I mean, it does have perspective skew on it. Again, one of the reasons why I love and insist on working inside of orthographic views, just so I don't have to deal with this first thing. So you can see the top of the neck here. You can see the top of the base. So it's not a great reference point, but it's a lamp. But the image is pretty high res. quote-unquote high res. It's 1000 by 1000 pixels. By default, you're not going to have that fidelity inside of Max unless you go to the little plus icon in the upper left of the viewport, configure viewports, and under display performance, you have 3 pixel values for baked procedural maps, texture maps, and viewport background / environment. Set all 3 of those to 2048. So I'm just going to move it to the side. Then I hit apply. It gets nice and crisp. I find 2048 is where it starts to get or give you depreciating returns. So if I were to so a little plus sign. I'll zoom out so you can actually see it a little better. This guy. Configure views. And it's the first tab that it takes you to. 2K, 2K, 2K. You can dial these up even higher, obviously, but I find after 2000, you start to not really notice that much of a difference, and depending on what the picture is, it can start to lag your system a bit. And I have never used anti-aliasing inside of this, so where is viewport configuration? It's this guy. And actually, I'll just where's my pen? Right there. And then just set those 3 values to 2048s. No worries. So, got it in scene. That's what we're going to be using to model off of. Doesn't really help that it's flat on the floor. Be kind of nice to have it upright. So pressing E, the hotkey over to rotation. And rather than try and guess, or entering in 90 inside of the spinners for the rotation on X, if you press A, not EH, A, alpha, you'll toggle on snaps. Yep. So by default, it's going to rotate in increments of 5. You can actually see up at the top. Do rotation in X, Y, and Z. So anytime you see 3 numbers separated by commas, usually it's an X, Y, and a Z axes for information. Get it upright, and just get out of the floor a bit. Move back. So, typically there are, if I were to grossly oversimplify it, there are 2 main schools, or 2 main trends when it comes to modeling. Extrusion modeling and refinement modeling. By the way, most of this stuff that I'm talking about is all covered in that week 1 write-up. Just in case, you know, difference of terms. I won't be quizzing you on terms, like there's no RIN component or anything like that to the course. But if you're wondering, you know, what was that thing called? It's probably in the write-up. So I've got my cylinder ready to go. I've moved my reference plane back. Drag. And I'm just going to give them a little bit of height, not a lot. Now, as soon as I switch to front view, so FTL, so front, top, left, are the hotkeys for switching between your orthographics. As soon as I switch to front, because I still have the home grid visible, so this gray pattern back here that unfortunately I have been toggling on and off with G. Again, I don't even think about it anymore. It's kind of useful to tell whether or not something is properly aligned to the middle of your scene. So this dark edge right here is the 0x axis. I'm just going to nudge my reference over a little bit so it's splitting the lamp in half. Because this is currently opaque, I can't really see my image on the other side. I don't really know if I'm accurate to it right now or not. If I give a little bit of rotation, well, yeah, I'm kind of close. What I can also do is hold down Alt and press X. So Alt plus X-ray. And it's going to automatically assign a 50% gray and 50% opacity material or override onto whatever you currently have selected. So now, because I moved that lamp image up, excuse me, I'm going to reduce my number of sides because 41 is more than a little excessive. I don't need my height segments yet, so I'll set those to hit F3. No worries. Actually, because, and I'm not saying it was the bug, but there is a bug that was occurring in 2019, 2020, and I'll just mention it here so that if someone does experience it, I can just send them a time link stamp to it, or you guys can send them a time link stamp to it, which is another handy thing about Twitch. You can actually share links with timestamps embedded. If as you're working, so you guys don't have to do this, I'm doing a demo, you know, I'm working on this, I'm modeling stuff, blah, 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 and then all of a sudden, pretend I'm still looking at 0, 0, 0. I rotate around, I'm like, there's nothing here. But as soon as I go to front view, hey, everything's there. I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, Max's orthographic and perspective cameras are prone to corruption inside the actual file itself. So, may as well talk about one of the troubleshooting tips I have for you guys. So one of the first things that you can try, or should try rather, if Max is starting to behave strangely, is saving out your file first. So you want to save your work. Take note of what iteration you're on. So right now I'm on modeling intro 10, which is terrible because I should be saving more often than that. And then if Max is freaking out, and by freaking out I mean it looks like it should be there, but it isn't. It looks like it should be operating this way, but it's not. One of the first go-tos I have for you if you need to troubleshoot an issue is to first file and reset Max, so you guys don't have to do this. You guys can just watch. File, reset. If you want to bring in all of your work, but again, you were having a spazzy camera, you know, whatever happened, scene started to get corrupted, you can go File, Import, and Merge. So you may have thought, instinctually, you'd be right to think, oh, it's File, Import, Import New Scene, or Import My Information. For whatever reason, Max distinguishes between non-3DCO Max format, so OBJ, FBX, STL, and its own proprietary .max format, and has commands for each. So if you're bringing in an external model, it's import. So if you have a 3D scan, if you want to play around with a model from online, you would use import. If you're trying to bring in work that you have done so far inside of Max into a new instance, it's merge. So you go merge, and there's all my work that I was doing on the weekend. You would find your most recent iteration. So Modeling Intro 12. Double click it. It'll give you the merge dialog box, and you just hit all and OK. And it brings all your work in. That is 9 times out of 10 the first thing that I recommend to people as soon as they have a bug. If the bug persists, there's another step which I'll get to later on. But for any kind of viewport issues, any camera glitches, that's usually the one that fixes it, because it's essentially resetting the max camera, the max viewports, and the default max space, and then just importing all of your 3D and material data. Only downside is that now I have to hit Control X, go back to where I was saving. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to add in that this is post-recovery. And it's back to using iterative saves. Also, by the way, I didn't realize I had turned this off as well, but these little brackets drive me crazy because it looks like they're edges. Shift and Juliet to get rid of them. So I've pressed Alt and X to set myself to X-ray so I can see through my scene or see through the current object. So now I can go into radius, get to match the actual base exactly, move it up a bit, because again, distortion or perspective distortion, drop my height, and I'm good to start. So converting to editable poly. Again, if an object has polygons that are never going to be seen, and admittedly nowadays when even mobile devices are more powerful than the computers that we had 10 years ago, at the same time you still want to be as efficient with your poly counts and with your texture space as possible. So when we get to texturing, I'll talk about that. Inside of modeling, if the poly is not seen, you may as well delete it, because not only is it going to decrease your poly count, but later on when you start texturing, you're going to have to deal with unwrapping polygons that aren't actually seen or in any way contributing to your overall appearance of the object. So just get rid of them. What command did you use to bring up your saves? Oh, that was just me copy and pasting the directory, because I was working on stuff over the weekend, so I just went up here, copy, because now when I go, actually I won't do it now because it's already rooted to that directory, but before it was bringing me to go scenes. Yeah, this is stuff that I was doing for someone over the weekend. So I just copy and pasted the link into where it says file name, sorry, the directory into the file name, and it brings you to the directory. It's just me being lazy, because realistically you can just as easily go, file, save as, and then actually direct yourself to where you want to go. I just copy and paste all the time. So now I've got the base in. As I was saying before, there are two basic schools, or if you were to distill things down, there are two basic approaches to modeling. One is extrusion, one is refinement. Extrusion modeling is exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to go to extrude settings, zero it out, bring that poly up, give it a shrink, because I've got this sort of flat surface or nearly flat surface on the top. Because I have spacebar set to repeat last, I can pull up another, shrink, and I'm just going to repeatedly hit I extrude settings, and then right click on height. Oh, it's just this. Yep. Sorry, I keep forgetting that there's a 10-second lag. So I'm not placing all of these pieces of geometry randomly or arbitrarily. One word that, if you haven't already noticed, is going to be the most repeated term, maybe second to poly, as you guys do modeling 1, is silhouette. That is going to be our major concern. Because if I said to you, and I'll show you guys how to do this in a second, but so if I gave you guys, or showed you, if I showed this to you, or if you showed this to anyone and you said, what do you think that is? You get anything from, you know, a box to maybe a pop can, beer can. People will say a square. Polar bear in a snowstorm, like it. Oh, 1 second. Nikolai, you're unmuted. Alright. So you can't really tell what it is. When you guys are working in digital drawing, I'm sure Anson's talked to you about silhouette and form and all that stuff. For modeling, it's basically our main goal, or it's the first goal that we have anyways. So looking at this, don't really know what it is. If I start adding definition to its silhouette, now it's still not exactly descriptive by any means. But now it's not polar bear in a snowstorm, as someone pointed out. It's hourglass, pedestal. It's a little bit more descriptive. Someone digitally throw something at Nikolai. So, with a lamp, it's the same thing. I'm not doing it randomly. I'm looking at where my form is, where it slips. So if I were to do something like this, so extrude, 0 setting, all the way to the middle, and scale, up here. It's You're good. You're good. It's Monday on a Tuesday. So, the placement for the new edges isn't arbitrary. It's specifically in areas where the silhouette is being captured or not. So I skipped ahead, or I would have put a edge in here just so I could show. Now again, perspective, this is tilted. If you ever find a concept artist that can do true pure orthos, no worries. So it is distorted. Again, if you find a concept artist that can do true mechanical orthographics, I'm not saying that you should be friends with someone only because of their technical skill, but make them one of your best friends, because it's a very rare skill set, and it's very, very useful, very valuable to a 3D artist. I certainly can't do mechanical orthographics. I can barely draw. Barely draw. I can't draw anywhere near the level of my models. So I avoid it whenever I can, which is not a good mindset to have, but whatever. I've been chastised by both Jasmine and Burge and Anson. Sorry, all three of them. But I like feeling good about myself. So I avoid it. Anyway. So, like I said, extrusion modeling, that's one method. I'm going to actually just make a copy of this. So I'll give you guys a little time to work on this. Again, I'm not showing anything too complex just yet. But I'm going to do a quick copy. And I'm going to... Here. I'm just going to do this real quick. So I'm going to basically reset myself to 0. So this one was done via extrusion modeling. Commonly what I say as a comparison between extrusion modeling to refinement modeling is the same as straight ahead to pose animation, which I'm pretty sure is talked about inside animation 1. If not, he'll definitely get to it in modeling or animation 2. So pose to pose animation, you do your, for example, for a walk cycle, you do your key poses first. So right foot forward, pass, lift, reach, contact, repeat. With modeling, it's, you know, this piece of the object and this piece of the object and this piece of the object. And then you fill in everything in between. Whereas straight ahead animation is, okay, first his foot is here, then his foot is here, then his foot is here, then his foot is here, and you're just following the path of their foot. So obviously I'm talking about walk cycles. Some of the problems are actually the same. So there's a little bit of comparison, parallel between modeling and animation depending on what what method you use. So this was basically straight ahead. Now I'm going to do pose to pose. And you guys don't have to do this. You can feel free to just watch. So the difference is I'm only going to be putting in geometry where the form changes. So right now, this is correct. I'm going to delete, or rather, because I haven't shown you guys that yet. Another way of getting rid of these is to delete it, or edge. So this is the method that someone asked, can we see something other than deleting our work? So this would be the deletion method, where you just collapse it. So now I'm going to go pose to pose. So I'm going to be prioritizing only silhouette breaks. So go inset. And admittedly, this one's a little harder to do if you're not doing pose to pose. Sorry, straight ahead rather. I'll do extrude. And again, I'm only looking for the major silhouette breaks. So if I'm looking at this vase, or sorry, lamp base, lamp body, and simpling it down to its absolute basic components or basic features, it's starting from an indentation to a widening, gets thin again, comes out into the base. See, told you I couldn't draw. That's basically what you're going for. The lowest definition of the overall form. So I'm going to keep going. Middle. If you are using repeated extrudes, make sure when you switch between when you switch back to scale, that you're not tapping it more than once. So right now I'm tapping R repeatedly, and I'm cycling through uniform scale, non-uniform scale, squash and stretch. Squash and stretch, non-uniform scale, not such a big problem because I'm aiming at the middle of the manipulator handles, but go ahead. Both of these are valid. I'm curious to know who you've been talking to, because they and I, we are on the exact same page. Okay, a little bit of philosophy and me soapboxing for a little bit, so bear with me. Nowadays, the trend or what I've seen the trend to be, and this isn't speaking about all modelers or all production facilities or whatever, it's just the trend that I've been seeing, is that now that our computer systems have become much more powerful, for example, like we can do in real time right now what used to take us minutes to do on previous systems, previous iterations. Good example actually, Final Fantasy Spirits Within. If you guys haven't seen it, I don't recommend it as a movie, like a narrative. I do recommend it for its visual effects. So one second, I'm going to actually pull up. So, you guys probably don't know, because I know there's a range of ages in here, but all the same. This is one of the screenshot, or one of the images from a 2001 video, or movie rather, by Square Entertainment, Square Pictures. So Square Soft, Square Enix, back used to have its own film studio, and their title, their inaugural title, their first movie title was this, and this bankrupted them. It didn't do well with American audiences, and yeah, they lost a lot of money. So yeah, Square Pictures went defunct, I believe, shortly after. Actually, don't quote me on the timeline because I'm a little shaky on it. But yeah, 2001. They had entire render farms, so stacks of computer servers all striped into raids just for her hair. Just for her hair. And it would take hours to render a single frame of her hair. Nowadays we can do that real time. So going back to what I was saying previously, while yeah, our programs have been getting more and more powerful, that doesn't really mean that we should be completely lackadaisical. Oh, if you want to see really old stuff, I can show you guys my old demo reel at some point. That was around the same time as... maybe? Yeah, it's pretty cringy. Actually, some of the work isn't bad by today's standards even, but yeah, pretty cringe. Anyway, so yeah, those artists that you were talking to, keep it as low as possible. I 100% agree with them. Oh yeah. They are my kindred spirits. So, yeah. And they're right. It's a lot easier. So think about it this way. When you have something that you're working on, eventually you're going to have to unwrap it. Eventually you're going to have to rig it. Eventually you're going to have to animate it. The more geometry you have, yeah, the model's going to look really, really smooth. So, as a bit of a half-assed example, set these to white and go back to flat. So, which of these two circles is more round? And that's not a question that you need to answer, but obviously it's this one. The problem is, and I was going to do this later, but I'll do it now. If you go back up to where you had configure viewports, so the little plus icon, and do perform this next, or what I'm doing right now, so press the plus icon in the upper left, configure viewports, go over to statistics, and turn on triangle count and total and selection. Hit OK. Now it won't immediately show, but if you press 7 on the number row, so at the top of your keyboard, if you press 7, this will get toggled on and off. So this is going to show you your number of polys, your number of tries, your number of verts, and an FPS for some reason. All the assignments that you get from me inside of modeling, all of your poly counts will be in triangles. Because as we saw earlier, each quad is made up of 2 triangles, so there's going to be a very big difference between someone who makes a 5,000 poly model with triangles versus someone who does a 5,000 poly model out of quads. Literally double the resolution. So all of your assignments will be written in, all of your polygon caps, polygon limits will be listed in triangles. And I'll actually say, you know, model this in 5,000 tries, which is 2,500 polys, assuming all are 4-sided. So both of these are spheres. And my lights are changing color because it's nighttime in the reef. Both of these are spheres, but in terms of the processing power required to display each of them, this is 4,500 tries. This is 228. I can have one of these or 21 of those. So again, since we're talking about real-time graphics and not pre-rendered visualizations, these guys are going to be more or less taxing. And if you're working on a game where there's a lot of visual elements to it, so like shmups, and I really don't like that there haven't been good entries into the shoot 'em up genre in past decade, it's more efficient. You can get more information on screen the more exacting you are with your polygon counts. That isn't to say that there isn't a time for going higher res, which we will in week 7 after the midterm with Sub D, which is actually what the other thing that those artists were referring to when they were talking about using subdivision, so Sub D modeling, subdivision modeling. The only time that you would actually need something at this resolution of mesh is for close-ups. Yeah, I like Blender. I haven't used it much. I kind of got bewildered by requiring an update in order to set left mouse button as the default mouse key for selecting things, and that's a really petty complaint, but yeah, they do some really good stuff in Blender. Max or Maya. Maya's bad for that too. Substance Painter, bad. ZBrush, bad. Unoptimized software. But you are right, they're old too. There's a lot of legacy code in all of them. And honestly, I would love an update for each of those programs where it's just skinning things down. Just anyway. So again, I was going to do the entire statistics thing now, but so I've blocked in all the major changes in form. So copying my absolutely horrendous line drawing that I did in Epic Pen earlier, that one. But you'll find as you go through, it's always so much easier to add geometry than it is to take geometry away. So right now we have a, well, I wouldn't say ridiculously, because I have 16 sides on it. And this is the other thing that drives me nuts, 16. Sorry, I'll just go off on a little side note. By the way, if you're ever wondering what a good compromise between resolution or having it appear round versus poly count is for a cylinder, as far as I'm concerned, it's 8 sides. So realistically, I should remove half of these vertical edges so that it's not a gigantic waste of resources. But I'll do that in a second. So now that I've got all of the primary silhouette breaks in, now I can go back and start adjusting it to be true to my overall form, or true to my reference. Right now, yeah, it's the lamp, but it's not, it doesn't have the same kind of quality as this one does. So once you have the baseline established, or the base silhouette established, one of my goals is to, one of my goals for you guys is not so much, okay, first you press this button, and then that does this, and then you press this button. My preference, or my hope rather, for you guys is by the end of modeling 1, you'll be able to translate what you see into your own steps, or translate it from what you see into terms in 3D. So for example, right now we have a lot of silhouette slips, so areas where the model isn't accurate to the silhouette of the object. Can't really do anything about it at this point because I only have so much geometry. if I had more geometry, I'd be able to make it more accurate. So again, translating looks super low poly. It doesn't have the round form of the source. Needs more geo. So I'm going to go edge mode, select or draw a marquee through the middle or over the middle. And this is where 2021.3 is going to give me issues because it's one of the things they changed. For you guys in 2020 rather, if you have a cylinder, and you want to select all of the parallel edges, so if I want to select all these edges going around the cylinder, all you need to do is hold down Shift, mouse over one of these edges that are parallel to what you currently have selected. As soon as you do, you'll notice that this edge and all the edges around turn yellow. It's giving you a selection preview selection highlight preview. So it's saying that if you now left click, it's going to select all the edges that are currently highlighting yellow. I don't know why they got rid of it for 2021.3, but they did. So doing it from the UI for you guys on 2020 is holding down Shift, mousing over, or hitting ring, I'm getting there, and selecting, or as you heard, ring. Or if you're in 2021, I can just double click. Basically the same thing. Again, it's making it so that you don't have to be doing this all the time. I'm in the viewport, I'm over here. I'm in the viewport, I'm over here. Which for me is pretty damn annoying. So I can select them all and subdivide them, which usually means I'm using connect. So if you go connect settings, by default it's going to give you one new edge. Pinch and slide I'll get to later. But that's what I want. So I'll confirm it, scale it to match, select these guys, spacebar to repeat last, it does connect again, scale to match, spacebar, or select, spacebar, scale to match, etc, 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 etc. This one's a little off. Sorry, someone else was saying something. Or it could be that you accidentally switched to stretch and skew scale. So like right now, if I go like this, and I accidentally hit R too many times to switch over to select and squash, it may appear that I'm scaling it out in all three axes. And of course, as soon as I say that, it makes a liar out of me. There we go. But it's actually scaling out on one and in on the other. when you say subdivide, I'm assuming that you mean either turbo or mesh smooth, correct? Actually, I'll do this the long way. No, that's the correct term. It's mesh smooth and turbo smooth are the application specific terms. So subdivision is the overall term. So yes and no. So you're actually talking about something that we're going to do in week 7. So there is a way to work with mesh smooth in your modifier stack, but it's good. It's good. It's good. Again, a lot of people are coming into this with previous 3D knowledge, but this is to get everyone up to the same level before I start making you guys hate me with what I expect you to do. So on that note, what someone asked about or mentioned that their lamp overall scale went wonky. Because we're working in a 3D element, always make sure that you're rotating around as you're working, because what looks correct from one viewport, as we just saw, may not look correct from all. So I'm just going to destroy the model for a second. Again, looks right by silhouette. As soon as you turn around, not so much. So, on the topic of subdivision, actually, subdivision is certainly one way to get a smoother model, but you'll notice that right now, so as you can see right now, that original lamp that we did, because it was built from extrusion modeling, it has this really faceted appearance, which if you guys ever need to do rough cut gemstones, what I'm about to show you is basically fixing what you would want to implement. So if I grab a sphere, for example, and made it really low poly, so I'll correct this one and then I'll undo it to make this look like a gem. So the reason why it's faceted like this, so since I know that we have a Blender person in here, setting creased edges. This is basically what's happening in Max. The reason why the model appears the way it does is because the engine isn't sure how these two polygons, or how the polygons relate to one another. If they're, smoothly connected to one another, what the overall surface information is. So it just throws its hands up in the air and says, do you know what? Each polygon is going to look like its own thing, its own defined surface on the object, which for our reference doesn't really work, because that's definitely a smooth body. Rather than throwing on mesh smooth or turbo smooth, or any variation of subdivision modeling, or subdivision modifier rather, if I'm being accurate about it, we can actually tell Max, or whatever engine that we're going to be using this in, for these polys, make them appear like they're one continuous smooth surface. So again, different programs do it differently. The way Max does it, and you guys can follow along with this on your first iteration of the lamp, is once you have the polygon selected that you want to appear to be a smooth surface, go into the Edible Poly modifier, down to polygon smoothing groups, which by default is usually collapsed. So just look for something that says polygon : SM or smooth. Open it. Depending on the method of creation that you used in order to start your model, this may or may not be an issue, or may be an issue to varying degrees. If I select these 4 polygons and then give it smoothing group 32, they're smooth. If I grab these guys, give them 32, now those are smooth. if I grab these 4, but give them smoothing group 31 as opposed to 32, they're smooth with each other, but you can actually still have a crease between these two guys. So these smoothing groups are, number 1, so these are arbitrary identifiers. It's not you are applying 32 degrees of smoothing on this. It's just identification numbers. So polygons that share a smoothing group will appear smooth in render. Polygons that do not share a smoothing group will have a pronounced edge or crease between them. And that's basically what's happening. So if I give the entire lamp smoothing group 32, I can't tell if it worked. I assume that you're referring to the smoothing group, Shinobu. Oh, depending on how you built out the model, it actually may already have a single smoothing group on it. Because I did this one with extrusions. Nope. That should be everything. So if it still has the jagged appearance, or sorry, not jagged, faceted is the correct term. If it still has a faceted appearance, what would that be caused by? So if it still looks like this, where you can tell tell the extents of every individual polygon, my guess is that for whatever reason, your scene is having issues with its normals. And this is something that I assume that you're in 2020, but just as a heads up, this is an issue in 2021 as well. Go to your modifier list. So the little drop down menu, type in NOR, so November Oscar Romeo, to add a normal modifier, and then add the same modifier again. Collapse your stack. And then we'll try. Don't change anything. Do 2. And then right click and collapse all. And then re-add them. Sorry, not re-add the modifiers, but readjust your smoothing groups. And Shinobu's asking, did I add a light? No, I'm still using Max's default lights. Just hit refresh. F5. Would chamfering the edges have this? So Midnight Matter asks, would chamfering the edges have the same effect, or would you say that for specific edges only? I like where your minds are at, because that's exactly where I was going next. So I'll quickly finish up this little treatise on smoothing groups, and then I'll jump back to that. So, on mine I don't have a shine on it. Are you in flat shading? Or flat color, rather? So, sorry, this is to Shinobu. I should say whose question I'm answering. Make sure that you're in standard view, and that you're on default shading. And it should give you some default highlights. And it's not showing highlights to it. And it's default well, I'm going to assume that it's default geometry, that you haven't assigned a material to it. Wait, default flat. Actually, Shinobu, you, I have the Scratch folder. I have the Scratch folder visible inside of submissions. So if you go modeling 1, the submission folder, so where you would normally hand in your homework, there's a Scratch folder there, or a submission folder called Scratch folder with no due date on it. Can you throw a copy of your Max file in there? Oh, you were on flat color. Okay, yeah. No worries. I was just like, oh no, is there a new bug that I haven't found yet? So, someone... Yep. The only reason I'm using 2021 is because some of you may have already downloaded it. If you're throwing things into the folder for the Scratch, it's whatever. Yep. No worries, Shinobu. Yeah, sorry, the entire Scratch folder thing is only if you're experiencing issues, so it's a slightly more reliable way of file sharing, essentially. Basically, I'm just treating the Scratch folder as cloud storage, but obviously accessible only to us. So I'm going to just quickly wrap up this entire spiel on shading groups, and then I'll address what Midnight Matter asked about chamfering, because they are on the right track. So whereas on the lamp I was assigning smoothing groups to make it appear smooth, in this case with the sphere, I'm going to take the smoothing groups away to make it look faceted. So selecting all the polygons, or Control A, clear all. So clearing all will remove all smoothing groups from the polygons. Instant diamond. There's more that you can do in order to get like rough cut rocks and whatnot, but without going into sub D or sculpting, it's a quick way of doing it. Something that someone also noticed while I was working on this, or was also noticed rather, if I clear all, auto smooth gets you kind of close. What auto smooth is doing is that it's looking at the mesh and where polygons intersect or touch one another. If they touch at an angle that is equal to or greater than 45 degrees, so from here to here, it assigns a new smoothing group based on it. So the more I dial that up, so goes 60. Yeah, maybe too high, 50. Bingo. It can give you a good starting point. So now I've got most of the body, or the body of the lamp, on smoothing group 1. I've got a crease up here that I don't want, and then another crease up here, because all these guys got smoothing group 2. Take off 2, give it 1. and off you go. So, something that I sort of glossed over. If you try applying the same smoothing group, or in Maya terms and apparently Blender terms, if you set a edge to be soft, which is basically what we're doing when we tell two polygons to share a smoothing group, if that smoothing group, or if those polygons intersect at near or past a 90 degree, so on the bottom of the lamp here, you'll see some dark shade artifacts. Now, they're not as bad as they could be because I took off the bottom face, so I'll just quickly put it back. Clear 32. There we go. Nice and ugly. Sure. So because these two polygons are intersecting at 90, there's no real way for it to smoothly shade between the two. There's just not enough geometry there, because essentially what it's doing is it's affecting the polygon normals, or the surface normals rather, to get that smooth visual result. And there's just not enough geometry there. If I were to start subdividing these guys down, which I'm getting to Midnight Matter's question. Now I can, because I have enough geometry, enough normal information in order to make it round. So, sorry, someone had a question. So, actually, that's a perfect segue to what I was going to do next. So, the positive versus the inverse operation. Oh yeah, I love it when it works out. It means we're, kind of working on the same page. We'll sync up more and more as the course goes on, hopefully. So, a more direct application of what Midnight Matter was talking about when they said chamfering out the edges. Exactly. So at this point, I've already added a bunch of segmentation to it in order to make it match the silhouette more closely. Once I get up here, I know I need an edge up top. I know I need an edge on the bottom in order to take care of this rounded formation in the silhouette, rather than entering those individually or manually and then scaling them up, making an adjustment, blah, blah, blah. Again, looking to get you guys to translate what you're wanting to do to commands rather than translating commands into what you want, if that makes sense. I know I need an edge above, I need an edge below. That's basically what chamfer does. You just go chamfer settings, set how far the chamfer is going to occur. So that first option is what method. So just like with extrusion, where it's group, local normal, by polygon, chamfer has its own modes. So usually you're going either uniform or quad. With the chamfer amount, you're setting how large. Essentially you're splitting a edge into multiples in order to give it some curvature. Chamfer connect segments, and again, unfortunately 2021 changed this a bit, but there's all parallels. Saying how many edges it's drawing in. So in this case, I'm telling it to draw in one edge on either side. And there you go. So anywhere you have pinched geometry, so I've got this really, really, really polygonal indentation at the neck. I'll double click to select the entire edge loop because I was just running chamfer, max remembers, hit spacebar, split, softened. And now I just need to re-hit it with my smoothing groups. So now what if I need to go in the other direction? So right now I'm adding geometry to smooth out the silhouette. What if I need to take geometry away to simplify the silhouette? Or, if you remember towards the start, I said that I used a 16-sided cylinder instead of an 8-sided, which would have made more sense. And again, that's assuming that we don't really know where this lamp is being used. It's the difference between having a pop can that you can bring up close to your face and look at it versus a pop can in a vending machine. So if any of you have played Overwatch, for example, there's a bunch of pop vending machines that can actually spit out cans because they didn't really intend for the player to get up close and personal with one of those cans in their face. If I'm not mistaken, those pop cans are all 6 or 8-sided cylinders because, again, it wasn't intended for them to get close to the player's point of view. It's, you know, supposed to take up maybe a 50th of the screen size. So if you need to bring your poly count down, and this actually goes back to what we were, or what was pointed out with the ring command. So by default, ring is going to select all of the edges that are parallel to your current selection. If you open up, I forget if it's modeling or selection. I just usually click on it. It is modeling. If you go into the modeling graphite tab and select a edge, doesn't matter where, select a edge, and then underneath where it says ring, so if your selections are if your ribbons collapse, rather, it's modify selection, down and right. If your ribbon is open, modeling tab. So by default, ring is going to just select, I've actually never clicked on that radio button, I didn't know what that did. By default, ring is going to select all edges that are parallel to your selection. If you're trying to reduce your mesh, which again, it's a lot trickier to reduce or take mesh away than it is to add mesh in. So yeah, another reason that you should model as low poly as possible at start. If you do need to take mesh away, but it's more like, I only need half as many lines or a third of as many of these lines, go to ring, or where it says ring, down to the bottom right, and it says dot ring. So if you select an edge, click dot ring, by default it's going to detect what edge you have selected and then select every other edge. So now every other edge parallel to what I had selected is now my selection. I can hit loop to continue them all the way up into the top of the lamp. Control backspace so that I remove the edges and the vertices that made them, so I don't end up with n-gons down the sides of my lamp. And I've just cut my polygon count in half, or my tri count rather, in half. Again, whether you're what did it end up selecting? Oh, select the single edge first. So if you already have everything selected and you dot ring, it won't deselect anything for you. It'll only create a new selection set. make it one smoothing group, like to get it smooth shaded. Oh, control backspace. So just as a bit of a reiteration, because since it's one of the major sources for n-gons at this point in the term, or at the start of the term rather, backspace is basically hitting remove from edit edges. So I hit backspace or I hit remove, and you can see that the silhouette has still changed, or the silhouette hasn't moved even though there isn't an edge here that's supporting it. That's because by default, remove will not actually remove all the components of the edge. It'll only, I don't know why my computer's double clicking. It'll only remove the actual edges, not the vertices that make them up. In order to get rid of the edges and the verts, either control backspace or control remove. I can't really think of an instance where you would want the vertices to stay there, so I think it would be safe to say that you should just hit control remove or control backspace when reducing down your model. So, very last thing, and we're actually running exactly on time, which is incredibly surprising. Yeah, honestly, me too. Actually, that's not true. Shift and backspace when I'm trying to clean stuff off my computer is my best friend, rather than recycling bin it goes delete. So, very last thing, very last sort of like core principle that we're going to be building on as the term goes on. So, you'll notice that I've been basically ignoring the lampshade this entire time. Obviously there's a reason. So there's a lot of times when you're going to run into a situation like this where I have these two, or I have this one object, but these two components are very different from one another. For example, if I wanted to do a sword, or a sword rather. So you guys obviously don't have to do this. I don't think I gave it any width whatsoever, so polys, pull. So everyone's got some kind of mental idea of what a sword looks like. It's the blade, it's the hilt, it's the handle, it's the pommel. So sticking with the pointy end, crossbar, piece you hold. Typically, not always, but typically, I'm just going to pull up a simple one if I can find one. Typically, along with that chain, or along with those new structures, so blade, guard, handle, pommel, or sorry, hilt or pommel, I forget which. Not only are there different structures there, there's also different materials. They're made of different things. So steel, presumably leather, different piece of steel, and steel. So when you're modeling, and actually this applies to when you're texturing as well, whenever you see a change in material or a structural seam, so an area where it looks like two pieces have been stuck together or placed together, held together, so you can't see the weld marks because presumably there aren't any, because it's probably like full tang. These are not the same piece of metal. You can see a dark line. Separating between the guard and the blade. If we had a view from the other side, you would be able to see a dark line or a structural line between the leather and the metal for the cross guard. And we can kind of see, come here, we can kind of see a seam between the handle wrap and the pommel. Anytime you see that, those are your best indications that you should actually be using new geometry. Or in terms of texturing, since I have you guys for both, those are usually the best place to do your set or your seams. So both modeling and texturing artists are looking for these. So that means that if I was modeling this, wow, my line quality is absolute garbage today, I apologize. That's one piece of mesh. That's a second piece of mesh. Third piece of mesh. Fourth piece of mesh. So one object for at least 4 meshes. So, okay, that's cool and everything, but how does that actually translate to max? So I don't want, while you could, I'm not saying it's wrong to do this, I'm just saying that you're setting yourself up for a hell of a lot of headache. While you could, you know, do an extrusion off the bottom of the sword. I'm going to do another extrusion here. There's the handle. And then I'm going to do another extrusion here. I'm going to shrink this in. I'm going to make this line grow. This is really bad. You can't be a good example, be a terrible warning. I'll grab these guys, and there's my handle. Yeah, you can do it that way. I'm trying to think of a funny analogy to make at this point, but I'm just coming up empty on it. You could do it that way. Realistically, though, you're making it harder on yourself. Be a lot easier. So now I'm going back to our lamp. If you have a piece of geometry that mimics the missing form, so in this case it's a lampshade, it's a cylinder, so you know, you could just go create a new cylinder and be done with it. So we actually have a cylinder nearby. We don't really necessarily want to go, you know, have these edges scale them out, pull it up, scale it in. I mean, you could, again, you could, and then you just delete these guys underneath. That works. Bottom line is, with the lampshade, obviously it's a little bit of a cheat because they wouldn't be actually connected to one another. But anytime you see a change in material or a structural seam, consider that as an indicator, not 100%, but 99% of the time, that you should be using new geometry. Either modifying or duplicating mesh that you already have. So in this case, I was modifying mesh. Oops. I could also hit the detach command. Oops. If I had polygon selected, that would work a lot better. Detach command as a clone, as an element. And don't worry, I'm going to do this a little slower in a second. And do something like this. Or, and I alluded to it. Sorry, alluded to it right at the start. I don't know what the hell happened there. Just create new mesh. Most of the time it's going to be a lot easier on you. Bring it up. Increase the size. And then if, for whatever reason, so if this was called something appropriate like lampshade, if you need them to be one object, just do the opposite of a detach command. Attach the shade, and you're good. So this is a little bit, or I'm going to allude rather to stuff that we'll do inside of Modeling 2, or that you will do inside of Modeling 2. Just because based on how Modeling 2 went this time, I think it would be a good idea to reinforce this. One of the biggest benefits of using multiple elements or multiple pieces of mesh, so again, either modifying something that you already have, duplicating it, doing an attachment like I just did. Number one, not only is it faster, so you don't have to do this sort of rigmarole, but something else that you can actually notice is, even though my lamp body is 8-sided, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because I used a completely different piece of mesh and then attached it, I've got 16 sides on my lampshade. So if that lampshade is going to be closer to my player's eye, they're not going to be seeing all these little polygon edges because it's so low res. If their eye level doesn't come up to the base of the body of the lamp, they're not going to see those polygon edges. So it also gives you different resolutions of geometry. If you break things up, some things can have higher geometry or more detail to them than others. You're not so much tied to doing everything from just a specific starting set of mesh. So, like with the sword, this should be a separate piece. This should be a separate piece. And these two should be separate pieces. So now you can go back and say, obviously I've exploded it to separate it, but you can say, okay, I want a lot more definition to this. So I'll go grab all these edges, ring, connect, and then scale them out. Now I've got a nice rounded 8-sided cylinder for the handle. Over here I've got all this extra garbage geometry, and I've even got a non-planar surface. That's a huge pain in the butt. Now that they're no longer the same continuous piece of mesh, select them, delete them, oops, double clicked, bang, bang. Fill these holes in, which I'll get into more next week, with the bridge command. And I really don't need all of this interior stuff anymore, depending on what kind of sword hilt I'm doing. Sword crossguard. So I've just chopped the polygon requirement for the crossguard to 1/4. On the sword, if I want to add in, some chamfering, some beveling, whatever, go nuts. I'm not saying you guys need to, but you can go nuts. collapse. By having all these pieces independent of one another, even though if I open up Scene Explorer, it's still just one object. Gives you a lot more freedom. And it's more freedom, faster, which is always a big plus, and more efficient. So anytime you see a break in structure, consider that as an opportunity to set it as a new piece of geometry, either as a separate element. So if I want to, for whatever reason, make a copy of a side of the vase and start doing something weird with it, like maybe I'd take this into ZBrush and I'd start sculpting a face onto it and make it some kind of haunted urn. Should be kind of cool. So duplicating what you already have and then going somewhere else with it, making a completely new piece of geometry and then attaching the two together. Bottom line, change the material. So for a window, glass versus the wooden frame. For a weapon, the leather wrap versus the steel of the blade or handle. For characters, not that we're going to be doing them, but for characters, costume versus skin. And something to note is that you can't, you all assume that I have a shoulder here, but in terms of 3D, there probably isn't. Unless a character needs to take their shirt off, all of this geometry is probably deleted underneath. If you don't see it, delete it. But yeah, those are the underlying core principles of modeling that we're going to be focusing on, and I'm going to be expanding upon over the next several weeks. And then, like I said, we're going to get into ZBrush. So next week I'm going to be modeling something with you in class, and I'll be giving you your first homework assignment. First homework assignment, similar with texturing. I'm going to show you all of my UI interface, or all of my UI settings inside of Max for unwrapping, setting up to go to Photoshop for texturing, all that fun stuff. And next week I'll be giving you an assignment in that class as well, after unwrapping what we're going to model. That being said, you will not have to unwrap your own models this term. All of the models will be given to you, so if you're struggling with your modeling skills, don't feel like that's going to directly impact your texturing. That's something that you guys will be dealing with later on in year 2. Everything at this point is provided to you with a starting point. So I'm going to wrap up the class, or this is the class wrap up rather. I'm actually going to make visible to you, if you would be so kind. Give me one tick. So never mind my cat going crazy on the wall. Do you guys have a class after this? Yeah, my cat's losing her mind. Don't finish that sentence. So I'm going to make the attendance folder visible to you guys. Actually, it already is. It's just... yeah. I'm going to make the folder visible to you guys. All I want you guys to do is give me a second to make sure that I've got it set up properly. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So there is an attendance folder there. all I want you guys to do is take a file. Don't send me weird stuff, please. By all means, send me your 3DCO Max file. Just take a file. You don't need to zip it. Name the file what your Twitch ID is. So whatever your nickname is on Twitch, or whatever your screen name is on Twitch. So Midnight Matter, Shinobu, whatever. And just upload it to that attendance folder in the next 5 minutes. Just so I can connect your Twitch ID with your actual student ID. Or any file. You can even right-click, create a text file, name the text file, whatever your screen name is, .text, and upload that to. Anything. Don't want it zipped. Also, while you guys are doing that, just as a reminder that after this closes, I'm going to stay in Discord. So I know that I know that Shinobu asked for some one-on-one help, so why did you have more questions? That works. Just your username. Because when you submit it, it's going to come underneath your actual name. See you Friday. Adios. Take care, guys. Yes, please. See ya. Attendance folder, please. You too. sorry. I didn't realize that I hadn't muted myself.